Hello everyone! A few weeks ago when I reviewed The Valley of Gwangi, I mentioned stop-motion animation master Willis O'Brien. Today we're going to talk about a film that O'Brien actually did the effects for, 1957's The Black Scorpion, directed by Edward Ludwig and starring Richard Denning, Maura Corday, and Carlos Rivas. A cataclysmic earthquake and volcanic eruption in Mexico attracts two geologists from Mexico City to survey the damage, but their study is derailed when they learn the community is being attacked by giant scorpions. I've long had a soft spot for The Black Scorpion. As 1950s creature features go, it's not among the best of the bunch, but it's not one of the worst either. I like it, and I'll always stick up for it. It's got a few fun moments between the main characters, it's got some good special effects, and the monster design is memorable. That said, I wouldn't necessarily call it a gift that keeps on giving. I think it's most enjoyable the first time around. On repeat viewings, when the plot no longer holds any surprises, the thinness of the story and characterizations can become more apparent. Plus, the repetition of certain close-ups, which is noticeable even on first viewing, starts to feel kind of ridiculous when you see it a second and third time. I do think it's a good movie in spite of that. I would just say, don't watch it to death. The Black Scorpion stars Richard Denning. Let's start off by answering the $64,000 question, does he roll his sleeves up? The answer is yes, he does. In his very first shot, he has his sleeves rolled up. In pretty much every sweltering daytime scene, those forearms are exposed, and if you look closely, you'll notice that the sleeves are way up, not just showing the brachioradialis, but the entire elbow and most of the bicep as well. Woo-wee! If you have no idea why I'm talking about this, let me direct you to a very important little public service announcement I made some months ago examining the Richard Denning sleeve phenomena. Contrary to how I remembered it, though, Denning does not wear his sleeves rolled up through the entire movie. Not even half. But I guess it's nice to have variety. If you're into plaid, we get some of that. A tuxedo? Check. Shiny protective gear? Check. Professorial sweater vest with tie slightly askew due to intense circumstances? Check. And as if that weren't enough, at one point he picks up an abandoned baby. Pfft. Rolled up sleeves and manly man holds a baby? Not to mention later on he has a few wholesome scenes with a little boy. Clearly, somebody knew what they were doing here. Anyway, Denning's geologist, Dr. Hank Scott, is a likable guy, even if we don't know much about him personally. See previous comment about shallow characterizations. And there's a nice buddy vibe between him and Carlos Rivas' character, Dr. Arturo Ramos. Carlos Rivas, born Oscar Weber, had a too-small career in film and TV after making a successful debut in The King and I just 1 year before this. Over time, the parts he played got smaller and smaller, but while this early role wasn't a high-profile one, it was sizable, and he holds his own with Denning. Both characters are charming and likable, they're colleagues, they're friends, they're never trying to outsmart or out-funny or out-hero each other. They're just doing their thing and working as a team. And I appreciate that once a lady is introduced, they don't become romantic rivals. That lady is Maura Corday, who enters the picture when she's thrown from her horse, and the guys rush to her rescue. Though she's dirty, sweaty, shaken, and a little embarrassed, she's still full of vim and vigor because she's Maura Corday. We learn she runs a cattle ranch and is highly respected in the community of San Lorenzo, so much so that she alone is able to rally the superstitious locals into returning to work despite their terror of the rumored demon bull that's killing animals and people. Neither Richard Denning nor Maura Corday were considered great dramatic performers, but they each starred in a run of 50s sci-fi horror films, which garnered them a place in the hearts of many a fan of the genre. What I appreciate about both actors, as well as several others, is that, on screen at least, they never show any signs of boredom or displeasure. They don't act like they're above this material. They don't indicate that they're only doing it for a paycheck. They don't sleepwalk through the movie. They project enthusiasm, and their engagement with their fellow actors in turn helps the audience feel more engaged. Unfortunately, beyond these three individuals, who are themselves static characters, there's not much going on with the supporting cast here. Some of the actors are stiff and don't make much of an impression. There are two minor exceptions. One is the local doctor who runs some preliminary evidence tests. He's animated and good-natured, and I would have liked to see more from him, but he doesn't reappear after this short scene. The other is this pesky little kid. He's cute, but, ugh, he shows up here, he shows up there, getting in the way, causing problems, not doing what he's told. It's a wonder nobody dies because of him. I surmise that a lot of the film's weaknesses stem from the script's lack of creativity. For one thing, The Black Scorpion was produced by Warner Brothers, the same studio that produced Them in 1954. Them was such a hit that it inspired a number of we'll call them rip-offs. Since I rewatched and reviewed them not that long ago, and it's still fresh on my mind, I was more acutely aware of all the elements that were recycled in this movie. Like how it opens with two guys investigating something else and finding evidence of some kind of attack. We hear the scorpions before we see them, and the sound they make is the exact same high-pitched screeching, chirping noise, but with a lower-pitched howl or roar added in. And like in Them, we've got a descent into a nest, talk of underground tunnels, and a situation where our heroes think the problem is resolved, only to find out it's just moved elsewhere. As much as it pains me to admit this, because I do like this movie, and I do want to stick up for it, not only did Them do these things first, it did them better. And then beyond these uncanny and probably not coincidental similarities, it's got a noticeably low-budget opening that relies heavily on stock footage, with voiceover from a comically sensationalist narrator. There are a couple instances of the film telling instead of showing. Mara Corday isn't given enough to do. Her character is a good shot, allegedly, and knows the land, so it makes sense for her to join the hunting party. But she doesn't do much during that sequence, and once it's past, she functions solely as the worried love interest. Now I know it's not abnormal in these old movies for the leading lady to play a minimal role in the action. Because I understand things like context, I don't have a problem with that. But usually there's a little more going on in the second half. And Corday projects that she is a strong, intelligent, capable woman. So I feel like they could have found some way to include her in the problem solving or something. Give her something to do. Save somebody's life, protect somebody, flip a switch, push a button, or look through binoculars and spot something, or even, I know some people would balk at this, even have a moment of peril. I know some people would say, oh, you just want to make her a damsel in distress. Woo! That's not what I'm saying. I just wish that she had something to do later on in the movie. Instead of just having flirtatious banter with Denning, looking concerned, and watching the final showdown from a safe distance in her far too elegant for this situation evening wear. It really feels like once the focus switched to the scorpions, the writers didn't know what to do with her anymore. But let's switch gears and talk about those monsters, which are the movie's biggest draw. This movie makes you wait a considerable amount of time before it shows you any creatures. There's a lengthy stretch where the only noticeable effect is a steaming volcano looming in the background of some establishing shots. But finally, we do see a scorpion. Hey, Editing Weiselberry popping in here to clarify that the scorpion makes its first appearance around the half-hour mark, so the wait isn't really that long. The pacing in this film is actually close to ideal. The special effects were supervised by stop-motion pioneer Willis O'Brien, who most famously did the animation for 1933's King Kong and 1925's The Lost World, and collaborated with his protege Ray Harryhausen on 1949's Mighty Joe Young. By the way, as far as I know, Harryhausen had nothing to do with the Black Scorpion. That seems to be a common misconception. Editing Weiselberry here again. I meant this to be a simple review without any history lessons, but as I'm editing, I'm finding a few things that I just need to address, and in this instance, I'd like to adjust the spotlight slightly. I've talked about Ray Harryhausen and Willis O'Brien. They were stop-motion geniuses. But there's an unsung hero here. The man who is listed as the animator on this film under O'Brien's supervisor credit, Peter Peterson. In the 40s, Danish-born Peterson was working as a grip at RKO and assisted O'Brien and Harryhausen on the filming of Mighty Joe Young. He watched closely as Harryhausen repositioned the models and became so fascinated with the process that he began doing his own tests at home. When the project fell behind schedule, he volunteered to help Harryhausen, and his assistance became indispensable, earning him credit as second technician on those award-winning effects. But Peterson's solo career did not take off like Harryhausen's because he contracted multiple sclerosis, which limited the work he was able to do. Still, years later, when O'Brien got in touch and asked if he wanted to partner up to do the stop-motion animation on the Black Scorpion, he said yes. They collaborated again on the giant behemoth 2 years later, navigating the difficulties of a minuscule budget and Peterson's rapidly deteriorating condition. Yet it appears Peterson's sizable contribution to that film went unrecognized. On his own, Peterson made 2 stop-motion shorts, Las Vegas Monster in 1958 and Beetlemen in 1960, but both he and O'Brien died in 1962 before they could team up again, or Peterson could make himself a name in stop-motion animation like the 2 men who inspired him did. I mention all this not to take anything away from O'Brien or Harryhausen, but to say, hey, here's somebody you may not have heard of who also deserves some love and recognition. Not a lot is known about Peterson, but I did find a great article by Philip Smolin that provides insightful information about his artistic contributions and personal life. I've put a link in the description if you'd like to check that out. Back to you, Weiselberry. The effects are really good, and the animation of the tail, I think, is especially impressive. The downside is that there is a lot of repetition. There are a few shots we see over and over and over again. I'm back. When I made that comment, I was explicitly referring to the flagrant and comical repetition of shots of the scorpion's face, including an extreme close-up that goes out of focus. But they also repeated shots of a scorpion crossing a road, scorpions emerging from a nest, and the black scorpion using its stinger to kill. I will say, though, if you aren't watching too closely or too analytically, you may not notice these others, and I hesitate to even call attention to it. Something else I learned from that article, by the way, is that the scorpion's face wasn't fashioned by either O'Brien or Peterson, but rather was created by artist and sculptor Hua Chang, who later became most famous for his work on Star Trek, including the design of some of the show's most iconic aliens, costumes, and gadgets. That really doesn't have anything to do with this movie, but I thought it was interesting. I guess the face is kind of goofy, but to me, especially when I was younger seeing this for the first time, the grotesqueness of the design helps make it more disturbing. And these guys are the real stars of the show. They're big, they're wet, they're drooling, so much drool. These are really disgusting beasts. They've got large pincers in front of a row of bitey teeth, a few tufts of hair sticking out here and there, and eyeballs that pulsate ever so slightly. And one of the highlights of the film is the sequence in the cavern where a number of giant creatures dwell. It's me again. I made a statement here that O'Brien took this chance to reintegrate some of his ideas from the spider pit sequence that was cut from King Kong. However, while that is something I've heard other people say, I no longer believe it to be the case. Rumors and legends about that darn spider pit scene abound. It's like a 90-year-old game of telephone for classic monster and horror movie fans, and it seems a good deal of what people believe about that sequence, how much of it was filmed and why it was cut, is inaccurate. That's a whole other rabbit trail. I'm not going to go down there. I will say I've always found this shot in The Black Scorpion strongly reminiscent of King Kong. The cavern reminds me of the inside of Kong's lair where he fights the serpent, and the random bird-like creature is so like the pterodactyl that attacks Andaro that it seems like an Easter egg. But regarding the rest of the scene, I have doubts. In the comments of any video about the spider pit sequence, you'll find people making the claim that O'Brien reused models or reused test footage from that scene in The Black Scorpion. Maybe that is true, but I don't see it. The sets and models look too different to me. It's likely O'Brien had the sequence in mind and may have dusted off some old ideas, but I think what is in this segment was all filmed for The Black Scorpion. Adding to the mayhem is the widespread claim that Peter Jackson used footage from The Black Scorpion in his reconstruction of the spider pit scene released as a special feature with his 2005 King Kong adaptation. If you're trying to recreate that scene as O'Brien would have, it would make sense to lift clips from another of his films to maintain his style and hopefully get a near-seamless integration. But when I go back and rewatch what Jackson made, I don't see anything I recognize from The Black Scorpion. I think it's impossible for anyone to be definitive where the spider pit is concerned, given that there are so many contradictory stories out there, and everyone who had anything to do with it is dead. All I can do is share my own observations, having just revisited the Kong footage, Jackson's recreation, and the Black Scorpion cavern sequence. And my observations tell me there's nothing to that rumor. But anyway, the fact that this space isn't exploding with oversized critters testifies, I suspect, to the limitations of the budget. But we still get a lot of scorpions and a 30-foot-long worm, and since every good stop-motion monster movie needs a monster fight, naturally there's a scorpion versus worm battle. The movie took its time introducing the scorpions, but it takes even longer to focus on the final boss, the Black Scorpion of the title, which is supposed to be even more ginormous than the others, and as if that's not alarming enough, he's driven mad with bloodlust, forcing the humans to confront him to put an end to his murderous rampage. One more message from the editor. As I'm sure you've realized, my perspective has shifted from when I filmed this review a few days ago. I rushed to the filming step without looking up some things I had questions about beforehand, and I shouldn't have done that, because new information does change the picture a little. Knowing that of the two men running the effects show, one was over 70 and the other had mobility issues and couldn't stand for long periods of time, I find myself reevaluating the effects, which on their own are top-notch, although some of the matte shots of the Black Scorpion have a spooky transparency I don't believe was intended. But now that I'm aware of the difficult circumstances, I have newfound appreciation for how much work O'Brien and Peterson did and what they were able to achieve, and I'm inclined to be much more forgiving of the movie for repeating certain footage, especially because that repetition doesn't detract from the overall awesomeness of the effects work, particularly in the cavern sequence, the train scene, and the epic showdown in the stadium. I regret that this review, which I've been planning to do for a long time, has turned out to be so disjointed, and there's part of me that would like to scrap what I filmed on Tuesday and redo the whole thing. But I'm leaving it as is because I think there's something to be learned here, and not just that I shouldn't rush to film before I'm ready. The Black Scorpion was made with some choice ingredients: appealing B-movie stars, a story formula that had proven successful before, special effects by one of the best in the business, not to mention music composed by Paul Sawtelle, who did a lovely job with The Fly the following year. Looking at it with a critical eye, I'm not sure all those ingredients came together in the best way possible. But I don't want to just be a critic. I watch these movies because I enjoy them and want to be entertained. And as far as that goes, The Black Scorpion absolutely delivers. It doesn't have aspirations of greatness, so all those little nitpicks and criticisms about plot holes or weak characterizations or the lack of a compelling story or compelling side characters or anything that you could possibly point out, at the end of the day, doesn't really matter, because it's just trying to be a fun movie, and it is fun. I hope you liked this video. I promised you something light after last week's review of M. I hope this didn't go too far in the opposite direction and give you tonal whiplash. If you have seen The Black Scorpion, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, so please feel free to share them in the comments below, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.